Is everyone ready to get started? Ooh, very echoey today. Okay, meeting,
Well, it's for me because it's closed session.
okay, so sorry.
It's okay. Meeting called to order at 5:13 p.m. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the May 15th, 2024 regular meeting of the Richmond Rent Board. Before we begin, as a courtesy to others, we ask that you please silence your cell phones or any type of noise devices. Also, this meeting is being interpreted, and we ask anyone addressing the board to speak clearly and slowly for interpretation. Tonight, we will begin the meeting with an open session to hear public comment before a closed session. The first item on the agenda is the roll call. For the purpose of the recording, may I please get an audible roll call from Rent Board members and staff? Board Member Dawkins.
Present.
Board Member Espinoza.
Present.
Board Member Height.
Here.
Vice Chair Guadalupe.
Here.
Chair Cantor.
Here.
Executive Director Nicholas Traylor.
Here.
Deputy Director Fred Tran.
Present.
And General Counsel Charles Oshanuga.
Here.
For the record, all board members and staff are present. The next item on the agenda is public comment before closed session. The purpose of open session is for the Rent Board to hear public comments on the following items to be discussed in closed session. The item for discussion under closed session is Public Employee Evaluation Government Code Section 54957, titled Executive Director. Tonight we have no speakers on this item. Okay. Since we have no speakers, we will now adjourn to closed session. The open session to hear public comment before closed session is adjourned at 5:15 p.m. Okay, let's begin our regular scheduled meeting called to order at 5:39. Okay, again, good evening, everyone. Welcome to May 15, 2024 regular meeting of the Richmond Rent Board. As a courtesy to others, we ask that you please silence your cell phones or any type of noise devices. Also, I have a few reminders regarding public comments. Individuals who would like to address the board, a request to speak card must be given to the assistant clerk before the announcement of the item. The agenda item, if you would like to speak on an item not listed on the agenda or on the consent calendar, you must do so under the public forum. Please refer to the Rent Board meeting agenda for the list of items or the agenda items list open for public comments posted above the table located in front of the chambers. Also, this meeting is being interpreted, and we ask anyone addressing the board to speak clearly and slowly for interpretation. The first item on the agenda is pledge to the flag. Please join me in pledge of allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. Okay. The next item on the agenda is roll call. For the purpose of the recording, may I please get an audible roll call from Rent Board members and staff? Board Member Dawkins.
Present.
Board Member Espinoza.
Present.
Board Member Height.
Here.
Vice Chair Guadalupe.
Here.
Chair Cantor.
Here.
Executive Director Nicholas Traylor.
Here.
Deputy Director Fred Tran.
Present.
General Counsel Charles Oshanuga.
Here.
For the record, all board members and staff are present. The next item on the agenda is Statement of Conflict of Interest. Are there any? Okay. Hearing none, the next item on the agenda is report from legal counsel of final decisions made in closed session.
General Counsel Oshanuga, can you report on whether any decisions were made in closed session?
Yes, thank you, Chair. The board decided that per the MOU, the executive director should be evaluated on his anniversary date, or 60 days thereabout. And so they will do their evaluation of the executive director on or about October 25th of this year.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the next item on the agenda is agenda review. Are there any changes to the agenda?
Are there any changes to the agenda from staff?
No changes.
Are there any changes to the agenda from board members? No changes from the board.
Okay, hearing none, the next item on the agenda is public forum. Tonight, we have 3 speakers. Each speaker shall be allowed up to 4 minutes to address the board. When your name is called to address the board, stating your name and city of residence is optional. Please terminate your address to the board when your time expires. We ask that you keep your comments respectful and appropriate. The first speaker is Ms. Kimberly Graves. And you could press that button on the, it's a mic, it's a button right there on the mic. There you go.
Hello, my name is Kimberly Graves, and I own a property at 438 South 20th Street here in Richmond. I have a tenant that has lived in that house for 20 years, and she pays $2,575 a month for a 4-bedroom, 4-bedroom, 3-bath, 2,000 square foot home. And according to the market rent today, it would be probably almost $1,500 more per month. Not only did I allow her to, her rent didn't go up more than $775 over 20 years. So that's about $35 a month on average. My whole point in bringing that up is that I'm what you would consider a mom and pop landlord. That would mean that I have a regular job, I work really hard, and I am not a corporation. I'm not getting wealthy off of this tenant. I allowed this tenant to not only move into that place and not increase her rent, but she also was allowed to run her daycare in my place. A couple of months ago, she had about 12 children in her daycare. I'm going to average about $1,000 a month times 12, and she would make $12,000 a month. And that would be $144,000 a year, more than I make, and I work 3 jobs. So my point in saying that is we have created a situation where tenants are treated as if they're the victim, and you are victimizing landlords in order to support these tenants who are truly taking advantage of the social climate of today. I am being bombarded with all types of legal documents asking to move into my property, owner move in. They've hired a private investigator to determine if in fact I deserve to move into my home. I have a son that lives here. I have a grandson that lives here. I want to move back to my home as I retire to be close to my children. And I'm being told that I own a property in San Leandro, right? I went to that home in San Leandro. The lady does happen to have the same name that I have, but she is not obviously Kimberly, who I am. And they've claimed that that's my property. And because that property is a husband and wife, Jeffrey and Kimberly, and they have a homeowner's tax exemption, and I also have a homeowner's tax exemption on the property that I actually live in. I have 2 homeowner tax exemptions. Therefore, how could they really accurately determine where I live? And according to them, your rules and regulations indicate that if I can't verify where I live, then that means that I don't qualify for an owner move-in. They also indicated in their summary judgment, because see, they're bombarding me with all these legal documents, and they're trying to make me spend money so that I would lose the property in foreclosure or just walk away. So according to what they said, they went to the rent board and they were told that I didn't file all the necessary documents that were required according to your ordinance. This is hearsay, right? But it's what they're saying the rent board told them. Not only that, they're indicating that I don't have a right to move into my property because I own other property. So now I have to, on my own, because I don't have $20,000 to pay an attorney, and that's what it costs, by the way. I had to pay for my own summary judgment, file my own summary judgment. And that is unfair. And I want you guys to try to understand there's a human side to these landlords who are being victimized.
Your time has expired. Thank you. The next speaker is Ms. Alana Clark.
Hi, can you hear me? All right. This is public forum. I'm not speaking on an agenda item. I do want, as you guys go into your deliberations about the budget, to understand the current climate that we are practicing, trying to preserve housing in this climate. First of all, not too long ago when interest rates were inflation was very high, the voters of Contra Costa County, the voters of Richmond decided to limit allowable rent raises to 3% or 60% of the inflation, whichever's lower. That is the law now, and that was passed when interest rates were very high. Inflation was very high, sorry. Now, inflation has come down as predicted to more reasonable and tolerable and normal levels, and we are still going to be limited to 60% of that amount, which is probably going to be around 1.5% this coming year, which is going to really suck for people who are really on the edge, especially now that homeowners insurance is skyrocketing, and that is for the lucky ones. Many of us are simply having it summarily canceled. The state homeowners insurance is a joke. It is incredibly expensive, and it covers only the amount of the outstanding balance, and only if it gets burned to the ground. For no other reason will that homeowner's insurance kick in for anyone. Having additional insurance, I can't even tell you the price. I don't know. I don't want to know. Neither do you. It's bad. So inflation is down, but interest rates are still high. I have a HELOC. I'm paying close to 10% on that HELOC. It's a variable. I hope it'll come down. I've been keeping my fingers crossed for several months now. Hasn't come down yet. And yet I'm stuck with 1.5% rent raises, and I work. I don't make any money off this property. I'm a nurse, and my paycheck is for my kids and for me. It's not for my tenants. I mean, no shade to them, but I'm not running my own personal welfare state for them, and they're very capable of paying for the cost of their own housing, and they are happy to. They want to. They don't want to be a burden on other people. They don't want that, and neither do I. And the imbalance is going from bad to worse. So I'm sure I've just scratched the surface. I wish I could cede my time to someone else because there's so much more to say, but I hope I've gotten my point across.
Thank you. Marilyn Langlois.
Good evening, board members. It's great to see you all here tonight. And staff, thank you for all your good work. Just wanted to, my name is Marilyn Langlois, longtime Richmond resident. I wanted to thank you for the work you did at the last meeting, looking at the budget and not sugarcoating it, looking at the realities of what's going on and finding solutions to any issues that might arise. I really appreciate your voting to have the staff come back with a budget that will ensure that we can get very close to full compliance with the rent fee, which is in fairness to all landlords, because most landlords, in fact, do pay their rental housing fee. So taking strategies to increase that compliance will be very beneficial to the program as a whole. I also appreciate the work that staff indicated that they're working on in terms of addressing issues of cost pool with the city. And I feel hopeful and confident that a resolution will be arrived at that will solidify a mutually beneficial relationship between both agencies, both the city and the rent program. We are connected in so many ways. The city has something to offer and the rent program has much to offer. So I'm really hopeful that that whole issue gets resolved in a win-win way that works for everyone. I look forward to your discussion tonight and to finalizing a budget for next year. And thank you all for your good work.
That was the last speaker. The next item on the agenda is to approve the consent calendar. The list of consent calendar items are: item G1, approve the minutes of the April 17, 2024 regular meeting of the Richmond Rent Board. Item G2, receive letters from community members regarding the fair rent just cause for eviction and homeowner protection ordinance RMC 11.100. Item G3, receive the fiscal year 2023 through 24 monthly activity report through April 2024. Item G4, receive the rent program fiscal year 2023 through 24 monthly revenue and expenditure report through April 2024. Item G5, receive late fee waivers for May 2024 pursuant to Regulation 425.
Thank you. Is there a motion? Yeah, Board Member Height.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the consent calendar.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
Great. Motion by Board Member Height, seconded by Board Member Espinoza. Let's take a vote.
Okay, Board Member Dawkins,
Yes.
Board Member Espinoza,
Yes.
Board Member Height,
Yes.
Vice Chair Guadalupe,
Yes.
Chair Cantor.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimous. Okay. We're now moving to item H1 under regulations. Item H1 is to amend Regulation 322 to include language that clarifies the rent board members or the rent board may submit agenda items and agenda reports. There are no speakers on this item.
Thank you. We will now hear the staff report.
You ready? Staff Attorney Palomar Sanchez will be doing the staff report.
I'm just going to go into the PowerPoint presentation. Is that okay?
Absolutely.
All
Thank you.
right. So good evening, Chair Cantor and members of the board. Palomar Sanchez, staff attorney for the Richmond Rent Program. Before I start this presentation, after a review of the proposed amendments with the General Counsel, he realized some additional changes may be necessary. General Counsel Oceanuga will explain further immediately following this presentation. So just give it a second and then we'll discuss it. Okay. 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 All right, so next slide. Okay. On April 17, 2024, the Rent Board directed staff to amend Regulation 322 to allow for the Rent Board or individual Rent Board members to present agenda items and agenda reports. Consistent with Rent Board direction, staff members are now presenting proposed amendments to Regulation 322, which will allow for the Rent Board or individual board members to present agenda items and agenda reports. Further, as a side note, upon review of Regulation 322, staff found one typographical/clerical error and one organizational error, which will be corrected. Next slide, please. Currently, Regulation 322A states the following in consideration of agenda items. A, the Rent Board clerk or presiding officer will read the title or the agenda item to be considered. B, a report will be presented by staff if called for by the presiding officer. And C, Rent Board members may ask questions of staff. Next slide, please. Proposal to amend Regulation 322A. So as you can see, the additions are in the red font, so I'll read those to you. The Rent Board clerk or presiding officer will read the title of the agenda item to be considered. In addition to staff, agenda items may be submitted by individual Rent Board members or the Rent Board. B, a report will be presented by staff or board members if called for by the presiding officer. C, Rent Board members may ask questions of staff or board members who submitted the agenda item or presented the report. Next slide, please. The recommended action is to amend Regulation 322A to allow the Rent Board or individual board members who submit agenda items, agenda reports, and allow the Rent Board to ask questions to board members who submitted the agenda item or agenda report. Next slide, please. Staff members recommend the board adopt the proposed amendments to Regulation 322A, little a, little b, little c. However, before doing so, General Counsel Oshinuga has some comments regarding the proposed amendments, and after his comments, we can take any questions the board may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and Mr. Palomar Sanchez. Just a quick comment. In one of my prior trainings that I trained on in terms of agendizing items, I believe one of the headers stated that the Rent Board as a whole agendizes items, but the body of the text actually explains how that is accomplished. And so insofar as the title is misleading, I wanted to clarify that the Rent Board as a whole does not agendize items. The Rent Board as a whole directs staff to then agendize whatever item it wants to see returned to it. So staff can agendize items, individual Rent Board members can agendize items, or the Rent Board as a whole can direct staff to agendize a specific item that they want to come back, and then staff would present on that item. Thank you.
Thank you for that presentation. Are there any questions from members of the board? Can you return to the language, the recommended language? So just noting that this still says agenda items may be submitted by individual Rent Board members or the Rent Board, which seems in contrast to what you just named. Do you have proposed language that would be aligned with the issue that you just raised?
Yeah, it would just be to delete or the Rent Board.
Right.
Or if the Rent Board has additional language it wants, that's fine too.
Thank you. Is it possible to have a visual of that, of just kind of what the language would look like without that, so that we can all be looking at the same thing?
I'm not sure if we can get it to you tonight. We can definitely have it ready for the next board meeting, though, for sure. But we kind of noticed these issues between the time it was published and this meeting, and so we didn't have the ability, and we wanted to hear your input first before making these changes.
Thank you. I understand that. My question is, while we're doing our discussion and all that, can you copy this text and remove those words so that we can have, and then put it on the screen so that we can have a written representation of what it would look like to have the recommended text that still aligns with our overriding regulations?
Yes, I think we can do that and maybe come back to this item if that's possible. I mean, we would have to make the changes and then present it to you. I mean, I don't have access to the computer, but I think we could do that fairly quickly.
Great, so maybe when, as we're, yeah, if it's possible to do that right now, that would be really helpful.
Okay. If you want to give us just a few minutes or a couple minutes just to double check and make sure that we get the language correct, is that okay?
Sure, what I heard from General Counsel Oshanuga is that it would just be removing those 4 words.
Right. So we'll
Yeah,
look at it, right?
I think and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we don't have a computer in front of us right now to do that, and that's going to require us to step out and then remove it and then upload the.
Got it, okay, I was confused because I saw the computer right there and thought that computer right there would be able to do that, but I'm hearing that it's not. Okay,
But you might be correct. Can that computer remove it and do that, what's being suggested?
Okay, yeah, if you give us just 30 seconds, we'll get it done.
great, thank you. So while they're doing that, rent board members, if we can just see if we have any further questions or comments, and then we can have the updated proposed language in front of us. Great.
Okay, we're ready. Sorry.
Wonderful, thank you. Are there any other questions? And since we don't have any public speakers, then we can also take comments at this time from the board.
So if you guys can confirm you see the "or" board has been removed.
Yes, it has been removed. Thank you so much, appreciate it. All right. General Counsel Oshanuga?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Despite the fact that it is, or even though it's a small change, it is technically substantive. So in order to approve the regulation with that change, we would have to bring it back to the next meeting. But we could just put it on the consent calendar for the next meeting, and so you don't have to go through the whole process again.
Okay, great, thank you. So we can't make a motion to approve this language as is, but we can make a motion to bring this back on the consent calendar at our next meeting.
That's right.
Okay, thank you. Last call for any questions or comments? Would anyone like to make a motion?
Put on the consent calendar. I'd like to make a motion to put item H1 back on the consent calendar for our next meeting.
Great, any second?
I second.
Okay, we have motion by Board Member Height, second by Board Member Dawkins.
Okay, I'll take a vote. Board Member Dawkins? I'm taking a vote.
Yes.
Okay. Board Member Espinoza?
Yes.
Board Member Height?
Yes.
Vice Chair Guadalupe?
Yes.
And Chair Cantor?
Yes.
Motion passes to return to the board at the next board meeting to agendize item H1 under the consent calendar. Pass unanimous. Okay. We're now moving to item I1 under Rent Board as a whole. Item I1 is to prepare language to identify the official newspaper of the Richmond Rent Board and place this language in the note to reader section of the Rent Board regulations. Create a note to the reader section for the Richmond Rent Ordinance and place the language identifying the official newspaper in the created section. There is one speaker on this item.
Thank you. We will now hear a report from, General Counsel. Since the last item, we did not amend the regulations. Can we hear from Board Member Dawkins on this item? Okay, great, thank you. Thank you. We will now hear a report from Board Member Dawkins.
Thank you. This report concerns official newspaper of the Richmond Rent Board. Is there a slide for me to read through, or should I just read from this?
We could put up the staff report, right?
Okay, I'll just read from the staff report.
Okay.
Statement of the issue. From time to time, the Richmond Rent Board is required to publish notices to the public in an official newspaper. However, the ordinance and regulations do not specify which newspaper. This leaves members of the public, governmental researchers, academic scholars, all with a legitimate interest in finding Rent Board published items, with no clue as to which newspaper the notice has been published, nor how they can access the published item. Recommended action: prepare language to identify the official newspaper of the Richmond Rent Board and place this language in the Note to Reader section of the Rent Board regulations. Also, create a Note to the Reader section for the Richmond Rent Ordinance and place the language identifying the official newspaper in this created section. I'd like to take a moment to share with everyone that this is my copy of the regulations. And what I'd like to share with you is the Note to Reader. When you open up the regulations, you have the title page, and then you have a table of contents. On the last page of the table of contents, there is a paragraph that says, Note to the Reader. In many legal publications, there will be information at the beginning of the binder telling you how to cite it, or some special feature in the title, in the book. But this note to the reader in the beginning of the regulations says these regulations are intended to help clarify the meaning of the Richmond ordinance. So my suggestion is that when we identify the official newspaper, we don't put an asterisk next to every word newspaper that appears throughout the regulations. We just put a note to the reader saying the official newspaper of the Richmond Rent Board is XYZ. Fiscal impact: publication costs of the selected newspaper may vary from budgeted newspaper publication costs. Background: there were two examples of mandated newspaper publication by the board. The first example is in the Richmond Rent Ordinance, section 11.100.060, N, budget. Includes the following language: after reviewing the same and making such revisions as it may deem advisable, the board shall determine the time for the holding of a public hearing thereon, and shall cause to be published a notice thereof not less than 10 days prior to said hearing, by at least one insertion in the official newspaper. And of course, the question is, what is the official newspaper? The second example is the Richmond Rent Board Regulations, Chapter 5, Section 502B, paren 4, includes the following language: the board, upon learning of the owner's intent to again offer the accommodations for rent or lease, shall attempt to notify each tenant by mail and may further publish notices or advertisements in newspapers or use other reasonable means to identify the tenants of the availability of the accommodations. So the purpose of this is for, under next steps, to receive the agenda report and discuss the pros and cons of the agenda report. The Rent Board is a valuable agency of Richmond city government by direct mandate from the people of Richmond in a voter referendum. The operations and publications of the Rent Board are of special interest to the people of Richmond. When members of the public or researchers from various oversight committees wish to locate public print publications of the Rent Board, they need to know where to look. Basic criteria for the choice of an official newspaper include, but are not limited to, that the newspaper that the rent program chooses is available for free to the public at the Richmond Public Library. So no one has to pay to take a look at the newspaper. And that the newspaper chosen should have an archival, searchable database with on-demand retrieval capabilities so that they can put in Richmond Rent Board and pull up the notices that we've published. Examples of identifying language for the regulations, we could say the West County Times is the official newspaper of the Richmond Rent Board. For the ordinance, an example would be Note to the Reader. The East Bay Times is the official newspaper of the Richmond Rent Board. The next step would be vote by the board on the recommended action. If approved by the board, direct staff to prepare the following lists and present these to the board in the July 2024 regular rent board meeting. July 24 was chosen because we are very busy now with the budget. We're asking the staff to list the newspapers of records used by the city clerk's office of the city of Richmond for official notifications to the public. We're not the only agency that publishes notifications in newspapers. It would be good to know what the city clerk, where the city clerk publishes Richmond's notices. We would like to know what the print sources have been used by the rent board for past mandated newspaper notices. This is not our first time at the rodeo, so we've already published, but in which newspapers did we publish? And then list all non-print sources where the public may access rent board notices, publications, including but not limited to social media. Direct staff to recommend an official newspaper of record to the board, stating the criteria used to base the recommendations in the July 2024 rent board meeting. Direct staff to complete the following and present the results to the board at the July 2024 regular meeting of the rent board and the board's approval to incorporate into the relevant documents. Compose appropriate language to identify the official newspaper of the rent board to be included in the note to the reader section of the regulations, which follows the table of contents. To create a note to the reader section of the rent ordinance following the table of contents and include the composed language to identify the official newspaper of the rent board. And again, the reason to make one statement about the official newspaper in the front of the binder of the regulations or the ordinance is so there won't be asterisks and things all throughout the document every time the word newspaper is shown. And that ends the presentation.
Thank you for that presentation. Are there any questions from members of the board? I have a couple of questions. My first question is actually for General Counsel Oshanuga, and I just wanted to check and see that what's being proposed is in line with our current regulations, correct? Just want to make sure that there's no legal issues that we should be aware of.
Not that I'm aware of. So in the recommended language, there's a suggestion that we alter the rent ordinance by including a notice to reader. That may be problematic, but that could be alleviated by having the notice to reader only appear in the regulations.
Right. So Board Member Dawkins, your recommended language is to create a note to the reader section for the Richmond rent ordinance. Are you specifically asking for that to be added to the ordinance in contrast to the regulations?
I will defer to the General Counsel's opinion as to whether we can add a note to the reader after the table of contents in the Richmond rent ordinance. As I mentioned, in the Richmond Rent Board regulations, there is already a note to the reader explaining this is not legal advice or other things that when this was put together to advise the reader how to use the regulations, I could not find such a paragraph, a note to the reader, in the Richmond rent ordinance. And so again, I would defer to the general counsel's opinion as to whether we can have a note to the reader, letting them know that when they come across words newspapers, that they will know what our official newspaper is.
So we can't change or add anything in the ordinance, but you may be able to achieve your goal by having staff create an informational sheet of paper with that note and attach it to the front of the ordinance or something, or, it just can't be part of the official language of the ordinance because the voters craft that language, but there might be a way where we can convey that information somehow. I don't know.
I think that's perfectly acceptable. And just to give another tiny bit of background, for those of us who spent part of our life doing research, hours and hours in the library, going over documents, and you come across something like official newspaper, but it doesn't tell you what it is. I can't tell you how that destroys your time, because now you have to look through every single newspaper in that city to find out where the information is. So this really would be a service to the public, to academic scholars, to researchers, investigative reporters, anyone who needs to know where are we putting our official notices.
Everything else, I don't see an issue with. I mean, it may be a policy concerns, but not legal.
Great. So then it sounds like Board Member Dawkins, since my understanding was that change, you're amenable to that change. And so I'm wondering if you have new recommended language.
Oh, I am, yes, amenable to the change that General Counsel suggested, and I would defer to the language that they would think would be appropriate to fit in.
Chair, I don't know if I suggested anything. I would just say, I don't have any examples. I would just say it can't be part of the ordinance. There may be a way to convey what you want to convey without incorporating it into the ordinance. I don't know what that way looks like.
So I have a question. Does the ordinance itself mention newspapers anywhere?
Yes.
It does, okay. So then, so yes, you're correct. You did not make a recommendation, but named that an option would be to have a supplement to the ordinance that lists this information rather than altering the text of the ordinance itself. And so Board Member Dawkins, would that be an acceptable solution to you?
I think that would be very acceptable, and any researcher, any investigative reporter would be very thankful to have something that would let them know.
Great, so then potentially rather than saying to create a note to the reader section for the Richmond rent ordinance, it would be to create a note to the reader supplement to the Richmond rent ordinance.
And typically, when you have something in the ordinance that you want to clarify, which you can, you do it through regulation. So if there were an official newspaper you want to select, it would typically appear in your regulation. It would refer back to the ordinance and say, for purposes of this word, it shall mean the following. And then you name your official newspaper.
Got it. So are you saying then that another way to achieve this, rather than putting it in the note to the reader section, would be to add a specific regulation that names the official newspaper of record?
That's right. You can do it. You can do it either way. But yes.
Either way
or you can do
works.
both of them if you want.
And neither, do they have differences in what would be governed, or is it either way is identical?
Well, if you have it, no, I think they have the same impact because the board would officially make whatever newspaper by vote the official newspaper. And so whether that appears in regulation or in a note, that's how the board's interpreting that word.
Great, thank you. I had one other question, which is Board Member Dawkins, you were demonstrating some of the times that the word newspaper appears in the regulations. And I heard that one of them was that there were some places where it was talking about the rent program putting things in the newspaper, and some places where it was about the obligations of landlords to put something in a newspaper, right? Am I understanding that correctly?
Forgive me, I'm having hearing difficulties.
Yeah.
Can you explain a little bit slower your point?
Yes, so maybe can we scroll up on the, okay, a little bit more? Okay, if you can stop right there. So these two examples right here, the top example says that the budget, the information about the public hearing of the budget shall be published in the official newspaper. And so this is saying that that will be published in the official newspaper by the rent program itself. The second one, maybe I'm misreading that. So the second one is also saying that the board will publish things in the newspaper, or is it saying that the owner?
No, it's saying that the board may further publish notices or advertisements in newspapers.
Okay. So, great, thank you, that's helpful. Thank you for helping me understand that. I am noticing that it seems like there's a slight difference here, where the first one is about the official newspaper and the second one is mentioning kind of newspapers in general. And so I'm wondering whether your intention is to restrict the newspaper to be chosen in both instances, or just when we say official newspaper, it needs to be a specific one, but for the second, because it says advertisements in newspapers or use other reasonable means, that there would be a little more leeway to select a different newspaper.
My intention would be, again, thinking about the public. The person who's interested in finding out what we did, they would, I would assume, if it's like this, very vague, advertisements in newspapers, they would at least go to the first newspaper or the official newspaper. Now, it may be in others, that is not my intention to correct or discuss. It's only to give, to give the public or the researcher one specific place to start their research.
Great, so essentially that if the rent program will be publishing notices in any newspaper, that it will be published in the newspaper of record, and then there could be additional newspapers as well.
Yeah, I would imagine the first thing would be published, that we would always, I don't really know, but we would publish certainly in the official newspaper. The staff may decide other newspapers, like the Richmond Standard or something else, would be appropriate. This is not to restrict any decision where to publish things. This is only, again, to give the researcher a chance, a place to start.
Great, thank you so much. That's really helpful. Thank you for
No problem.
helping me understand. So, any other questions from the board?
Yes, really quick. Is there a way that we can just inform the public in a quick, easy way? I'm wondering if they decide to change the official newspaper, if we have to go through this process again, and is this the best way for us to allocate and prioritize our time in things that we need to talk about in the rent board? So like, can we just inform the public maybe when the agenda is being published, like find more information in these Bay Times or whatever it is that you guys normally go to? Does it have to be done officially through a whole process?
Who is that question directed towards?
I guess staff.
Staff, okay.
My assumption is that if the board chose an official newspaper and then at some point in the future wanted to change the newspaper, the official newspaper, there would have to be a regulation change. So I do understand some of the concerns you brought up. I'd also like to ask a couple of questions just to clarify also.
I think the question from Board Member Guadalupe was, is there an alternative? Instead of going through the regulation amendment, does staff know? Can they just inform the public, look, we're going to be using this newspaper going forward? So I think she's looking for staff to answer that question.
Yeah, we can notify the public without changing the regulations, or we could certainly do that. I do have some questions for Board Member Dawkins and the board as a whole. As you know, newspapers.
So sorry, I just want to check in about process. Is that okay for him to ask questions since we've historically just had the board be the ones asking questions?
It's up to the chair. It's the chair's privilege. The chair is the one who allows for staff to speak if it's not our item. So it has to go through you.
Okay, no problem. Just wanted to check. Go for it.
May I ask a quick question?
Yes, thank you for
Great,
asking.
thank you. As you know, newspapers often endorse various political candidates. They also endorse various measures. So there may be some thoughts or concerns around picking a particular newspaper and the potential impact of associating with that particular newspaper in the future. So that's one concern that I had.
Speak to that before you go
Yes.
on. I think one of the things that's in here about the staff is to see what the city of Richmond does. They have that same problem. The city of Richmond publishes in newspapers, various departments publish things. And it might be to our best interest to follow the example of the city. So anyone who comes to the city of Richmond would know that they could find out from the city clerk's office, where do you publish official notices to the public? Which newspaper do you use? It would be, in my mind, very consistent for all agencies just to follow what the city clerk does. And that way we don't have to pick and choose.
Yeah, so when the program first started back in 2017, it was incubated by the city manager's office, and I believe the East Bay Times was chosen. I don't know if the city currently uses that newspaper as their official newspaper, but we've been using it ever since. So I can verify with the city as to which newspaper they use and come back to the board with that information.
Well, East Bay Times certainly fits the criteria. It's available at the Richmond Public Library. And also they have a very credible database for on-demand retrieval. So it would certainly be an excellent choice.
Yeah, and I would have concerns around picking maybe a newspaper that is too niche. In other words, it's maybe for only one particular neighborhood, or maybe from a particular nonprofit or whatever. It probably is best, just from my view, to pick a newspaper that is universally accepted as in the city as kind of a standard newspaper that most people would look at.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I would think that even though we're an independent agency, that we want to be not so much in lockstep, but we want to show consistency with how the rest of the government of the city of Richmond handles their publications.
Right.
Thank you. Any other questions from staff?
No other questions.
Okay. Any other questions from the board? Okay, so seeing no further questions, Madam Clerk, please call the public speaker.
Yes, we only have one speaker, Ms. Alana Clark. And if you could press the red button to speak. The red button on the mic. On the mic, it's like a little, no, it's on the box. Yes, thank you.
That's a button, okay. Newspaper. The official newspaper. How obsolete can you get? Unfortunately, that's what we get when we copy our ordinances for the voters from Santa Monica's rent control circa 1970-something. Yes. This requirement to publish in an official newspaper is extremely obsolete, but we are stuck with it because Measure L was copied from Santa Monica's rent control ordinance from the 1970s, and it was not very well proofread. And it was certainly not particularly appropriate in this case, this newspaper thing, and in other cases for, when did this law pass? 2015? Something like that. Anyway, we're stuck with it. The voters voted. But as Mr. Oceanuga said, things can be changed via regulation, and a lot has changed and been added. You can't change Measure L, but you can change the regulations. Your binder, Ms. Dawkins, is a great idea. I strongly suggest that you take Measure L, the original text, which is actually in the packet for this meeting, and print it out and add it to your binder so you can see what language was Measure L and what language was passed by the boards of this body, so that you can see what you actually can change. Because that's a really important distinction. "30-year-old language, not well proofread." That's all I got to say, thanks.
That was the last and only speaker.
Now is, thank you to your speaker, and now we're opening to comments from board members. Board Member Dawkins. Yeah, go for it.
Ms. Clark, I just want to thank you for your comment.
Great. Any other comments or discussion from board members? Okay, would anyone like to make a motion? Actually, I think I will make a motion, if that's okay. Can you scroll back down to the language, the recommended language?
I just want to clarify one thing. I don't think I misspoke, but I cannot remember. You cannot change the ordinance. You cannot change the ordinance through regulation either. What you can do is you can clarify where the ordinance might be ambiguous, and what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to implement the ordinance, and you do that through various procedures and processes that you adopt via regulation. Just want to make sure I'm clear on that.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so just want to repeat, especially for our speaker, who I see is not listening right now, that the rent board regulations do not change the ordinance. They do not alter the ordinance in any way. They simply clarify the language in the ordinance. Hopefully our speaker will get that in somehow. So I would like to make a motion. Sorry. The time was up. I would like to make a motion to direct staff to complete the following and present the results to the board at the July 2024 regular meeting of the Rent Board for the board's approval to incorporate into the relevant documents. A, compose appropriate language to identify the official newspaper of the Rent Board to be included in the note to the reader section of the regulations following the table of contents. B, to create a note to the reader supplement to the Richmond rent ordinance and include the composed language to identify the official newspaper of the Rent Board. That's my motion. And I'd like to ask the audience to please quiet down a bit. Ms. Clark, I'd like to ask you to please quiet down a bit. Thank you. Do I have a second to the motion?
I second the motion.
Great. We have a motion by Chair Cantor and second by Board Member Dawkins.
All right, I'll take a vote. Board Member Dawkins?
Yes.
Board Member Espinoza?
Yes.
Board Member Height?
Yes.
Vice Chair Guadalupe?
Yes.
And Chair Cantor.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimous. Okay. We're now moving to item J1 under budget. Item J1 is one, receive a draft proposed fiscal year 2024 through 25 rent program budget and corresponding 10-year financial projection, and two, determine adoption of the fiscal year 2024-25 budget and approval of the fees consistent with sections 11.100.060 N and I of the rent ordinance. We have three speakers on this item.
Thank you. We will now hear the staff report.
Good evening, Chair Cantor and members of the Richmond Rent Board. I'm very happy to see all five faces here this evening. I'm Fred Tran, the Deputy Director of the Rent Program. The item before you is to receive a draft of the proposed fiscal year 2024-25 budget and rental housing fee and the corresponding 10-year financial projection. Before I review what we'll cover in this presentation, I wanted to tie in the items back to the rent ordinance and its requirements. Section 11.100.060N of the rent ordinance requires that the board hold a public hearing and adopt an annual budget for the upcoming fiscal year no later than July 1. The annual budget is funded by the residential rental housing fee, the amount of which is determined by the City Council following a recommended action from the Rent Board. In consideration of this requirement, staff members have prepared a proposed fiscal year 2024-25 budget with fees and accompanying 10-year financial projection for the Rent Board's considerations and comments. The purpose of the item is to receive feedback from the board on the proposed budget and determine a date for discussion of a potential adoption by the July 1 deadline. Last week at the special rent board meeting on May 7th, item F1, staff were directed to draft a proposed budget for fiscal year 2024-25, implementing option 2 in accordance with the presentation provided by Executive Director Nicholas Traylor. Option 2 proposed the assumptions presented before you. First of all, the salary step increases per each memorandum of understanding, or MOU, and side letter for Local 1021, Local 21 Mid-Management, and Local 21 Executive Management. Approximately double mass mailing budgets to 4 campaigns for the upcoming fiscal year. Increase and invest in new interpretation services. Basically have a new request for proposal for additional vendors that would follow the adoption. Reclassify the office assistant role in the hearings unit to an administrative trainee or equivalent. Delay the hire to the second quarter of the fiscal year. And finally, add a compliance specialist to be hired in the second quarter of the fiscal year. The option 2 proposal will establish the rental housing fee for the fiscal year of 2020, 24-25 at $261 for fully covered rental units and $148 for partially covered rental units. The budget of the rent program will be approximately $3.6 million in expenditures and $3.7 million in revenue. The next section of this presentation is designed to walk the board and the members of the public through the categories of expenses we anticipate in the upcoming fiscal year. All of our anticipated expenses are encapsulated in the budget, with an exception of the operating reserve, which will be discussed later with the 10-year projection. Presented is the category of expenses for the proposed budget. We typically start the budget and fee process by estimating the costs associated to administer the rent program for the following fiscal year. Once we have the total cost with assumptions factored, then we calculate the fees or revenues required to recover those operating costs. I'll first present the salaries and wages with fringe benefits because those expenses are primarily reasons why the budget and fees increased this fiscal year. As well, it was mentioned in the last board meeting. Those two categories typically make up 80 to 85% of the overall budget on an annual basis. Next, I will review the professional and administrative services, other operating expenses, and then I will conclude discussing the cost pool charges and non-capital expenses. Sorry, my computer's a little bit slow. It's been lagging all day. Please refer to the highlighted amounts in orange that are the total salary and wages. The salary and wage increases in fiscal year 23-24 has been explained in last year's fee study. As a refresher, in May and June of 2023, the city and unions reached an agreement for salary and classification compensation adjustments based on a study developed by the Siegel consulting firm, which ratified the Memorandum of Understandings. Those MOUs and side letters ratified were also included in the April 17th regular rent board meeting in item K1. As unionized city employees, the rent program staff salaries have been adjusted per the agreed upon MOUs for all three bargaining units. The salary and classification compensation study increases are the primary reasons for the budget increases over the past two fiscal years. For instance, Local 1021, Local 21 Mid-Management received a 4% base wage increase effective July 1, 2023, salary schedule increase of 4% effective January 1, 2024, and their annual standard step increases per the MOU. For bargaining unit Local 21 executive managers, they received a similar COLA increase of 5% effective January 2024, as well as longevity pay and a 2% deferred compensation contribution. Also in fiscal year 2023-24, 2 office assistants were approved to be hired for the hearings unit and the public informations and enrollment unit. The MOU ratifications remain in effect for fiscal year 2024-25 with similar salary schedule increases of 4% and COLA increase of 5% effective January 2025. The step increases and annual merit increases have also been budgeted for fiscal year 2024-25. Option 2 will reclassify a vacant office assistant role in the hearings unit to an administrative trainee and add a compliance specialist in the second quarter of the fiscal year. The percentage of total salaries and wages to the total budgeted expense is highlighted in green and remains at 50 to 55% of the total budget. The percentage of total fringe benefits to total budgeted expense has been decreasing slightly from 30% to the upper 20 percentage point, which is also highlighted in yellow. The next category I'll discuss are the proposed professional and administrative services. Presented, you'll see a decrease, which is primarily from the city implementing a citywide land management system. Last year, we had budgeted $100,000 if we were going to implement our system, and we've been working with the city to it's a new consulting firm called IMS, and so I haven't received a specific amount and when that billing would occur. For the professional services contracts, interpretations is budgeted to be $41,700, an increase of $17,800 from prior year. Translations is budgeted at $19,000, an increase of $9,500 from prior year. Temporary staffing will be budgeted at $20,000. We have a staff in the PI unit who will be out on leave in the second quarter of this year. The community services agency's contract remained the same. Last year it was $275,000, which $200,000 was dedicated to the Eviction Defense Center and $75,000 of legal services to assist landlords and tenants. And finally, the services, dues, and subscriptions is budgeted at $21,906. There's various different costs there. There's $2,500 for Track-It, which is the city's current land management system. There's California Bar Association dues for our attorneys. There's Data Tree, which we use to confirm property information, as well as legal research subscriptions, ads promotions, and general expenses for program supplies. The next category is other operating. We're proposing $77,000, which includes the following allocation. It's primarily made up of postage and printing expenses for the mailers that we do. Those mailers typically consist of the housing fee invoicing, late rental housing fee invoices, printing the guide to rent control for tenants and landlords, and postcards. We originally had budgeted close to $15,000 for both postage and $15,000 for printing. This next fiscal year, we've budgeted $30,000 for each of those. And finally, we have a lease combination of printers, scanners, copiers, and fax, and that lease is $9,000 annually, and office supplies to operate the rent program at $8,000. Lastly, we budgeted for cost pool and non-capital expenditures. Cost pool can be a significant line item in our budget. With the latest information and discussions with the city, we expect to be charged $56,315 for a civic center rent allocation. The general liability, we budgeted $99,980. This amount was also provided by the city. No amount has been budgeted for the administrative charges, which is also referred to as indirect costs. These are central city services such as provided by the city, the IT department, human resources, finance, and city clerk's office. The rent program leadership are engaged with ongoing discussions with the city's attorney and city manager's office and finance regarding the cost pool charge amounts. And we'll keep you apprised as those discussions further. There's been a $9,500 budget to cover the cost of supplemental liability insurance, which is known as SLIP, and a $500 mobile phone fee for our program's mobile phone to text and call so we can keep individuals' numbers anonymous so it doesn't cause any personal interference. The next section of the budget presentation is the financial status and 10-year projection. I want to move on to discussing our financial projections based on our proposed budget. At the direction of the Rent Board, we issued an RFP for financial consulting services and ultimately selected Kevin Harper to prepare a projection and provide recommendations in support of the agency's goals to achieve long-term financial stability. Financial projections are a living document. As recommended by Kevin Harper, financial projections will update continuously based on our actual and projected expenses. A draft of a 10-year financial projection based on the proposed fiscal year 24-25 budget was provided as an attachment to the proposed budget and fee document. Please note, projections are based on proposals documented, and these projections are revised, and the budget is revised as we get provided additional financial information. For instance, collections rate change on practically a daily basis. So it will impact the budget and will decide whether the program has a net surplus or deficit at the end of this fiscal year. The financial projections allow for more informed decision making. A full projection sheet is far too large to compare on the slide. It's enclosed in attachment 2B, and my computer is being a little fidgety, but I'll also try to put it on the screen so everybody's able to see it. What can we learn from this projection? This model projects revenues and expenses through fiscal year 2030 to 31, and it assumes costs will increase unless otherwise specified, and the rental housing fee will increase per the 2024-25 budget with a 5% salary and wage increase and a 2% increase for most other line items. This is the assumption with no other MOU ratifications. All the numbers are adjustable, and the projection is meant to illustrate the financial health of the agencies in further additional years and will also be added to the budget once approved to move forward. The projection can also be used for long-term financial planning, provide us information about when new agencies might be in the best position to take on unusual expenses. The current projection allows the rent program to maintain reserves in the range recommended by the board at 17 to 25%. As compliance with property enrollment and fee payment increases, reserves may accrue faster than the projection indicates, or fees may not necessarily be increasing as quick as each year, and will notify and adjust the board accordingly. The projection also shows target and funding balance amounts that will ensure the agency has funds available to cover expenses in at least 2 months of the new fiscal year in the event revenue collections are delayed. As part of the 10-year financial projection, it was recommended that the reserve op policy be established. Once the proposed budget gets approved, I will prepare a financial version with the reserve policy and any recommendation for potential contributions as the budget is adopted. The reserve policy was developed in accordance with the Government Financial Officers Association, or GAFOA, Its primary purpose is to protect against reducing service levels and raising fees because temporary revenue shortfalls or unpredicted one-time expenditures may occur. GFOA recommends, at a minimum, for general purpose governments, regardless of size, maintain unrestricted budgetary fund balance of no less than 2 months of regular operating revenues or operating expenditures. It has been determined that 17% minimum reserve is an acceptable target per the reserve policy. Rent programs been directed to monitor its finance with the intent to end each fiscal year with the fund balance equivalent to the maximum of 2 months, a minimum of 2 months, a maximum of 3 months. These funds shall not be considered as part of the rent board's reserve. If you look at this chart, the first line item, that 1.5 million, that's our cash on hand as of April 2024. The estimated deficit, which is also part of the 10-year projection, we have currently updated the deficit to be 122,000, which nets us out at a cash for the end of the fiscal year to be approximately 1.4 million. The current balance that we have in our committed fund balance, which are our reserves, is 641,000, almost 642,000. Minus that, we have a net projected cash as of June 30 to be 787,000. That amount is less than 3 months of next year's budgeted amount. So since it's less, fees won't be decreasing. As of now, with option 2, budgeted expenses for 2024-25 is approximately 3.6 million. So at the 2-month minimum, we would need to keep at least a little bit over 600,000 in the reserves and no more than 900,000. Now that we've reviewed the budget expenditures and financial projections based on option 2, we'll move over to the fee study. The number of units applicable to the rental housing fee is critical to be able to calculate the fees to charge to recover the cost to administer the rent program. These numbers represent the units to factor and calculate the rental housing fee. The table before you illustrates how our units changed over the past year, with the overall trend being a modest gain in the number of applicable rental units. In sum, last year we had 18,134 rental units applicable for the rental housing fees, and we've seen an increase of 208 with a net of 18,342. When we use the updated unit counts as denominators for our proposed budget, we arrive at fees of $261 for fully covered units and $148 for partially covered units. As we set goals for collections of the rental housing fees for the future, it's helpful to understand where we've been able to accomplish thus far. The slide contains a summary of the funds expended and collected since the program's inception. We presented this slide to the board each year. I want to draw attention to the last row of the table, which shows funds expended and revenues collected for the current fiscal year. The rent program anticipates to expend approximately $3 million through the end of the fiscal year and have a collections of approximately $2.8 million in revenue. It may increase depending on how our collections efforts are in the next 6 weeks. Depending on the collection efforts, the program potentially may have a fiscal year net deficit. Collection efforts for all assessed fees are ongoing. In 2019, the rent program entered into a contract with the collection service to recover unpaid fees. To date, for this fiscal year, the agency has collected approximately $26,000. The projected rental housing fee collections rate for 24-25 fiscal year, or going into 24-25, will have 89%. This table compares the proposed fee to previous fiscal years. If you see in 18-19, there was a bit of a difference because governmental units were being charged, but now they're as a part of the partially covered, and we have it separated. Next steps. Please provide any feedback on the proposed budgets presented, and staff will make any necessary revisions. To meet the July 1 deadline and the 10-day publishing requirements, a hearing date is needed to be scheduled. As of now, Friday, May 31st, the council chambers and an interpreter are available for a special rent board meeting. Staff will take a poll to confirm if rent board members are available that evening. If the budget is adopted by the rent board on the May 31 date, then staff will agendize any item at City Council to adopt the fiscal year 24-25 residential rental housing fee to be incorporated into the master fee schedule, then begin invoicing in accordance with the rent ordinance. Recommended action. Receive draft of the fiscal year 2024-25 rent program budget and corresponding 10-year financial projection. Determine adoption of the fiscal year 24-25 budget and approval of the fees consistent with section 11.100.060N and L of the rent ordinance. Myself and Executive Director Nicholas Trailer here available to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you so much for that presentation. I'm going to pause us for a moment because I believe that we need to take a break for the interpreter, correct?
That's if she wants to. Do you need a break? No, she's okay.
You sure? Okay, great. We had been trying to stop the meeting about halfway through, so if you do need a break, please let me know at any point, and we can do a motion for a recess. Okay, in that case, are there any questions from members of the board? Board Member Height.
Where is the money coming from for the Harper's CPA? In other words, I can't figure out where that's coming from.
That was actually conducted in 2020.
Oh, okay, so that'd
Yeah,
be on
so
the
it's been
2020.
expended
It's
3
already-
fiscal years ago.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from members of the board?
Yes, I had a question. I was interested a couple meetings ago about a 360 evaluation and was wondering if we can contract with somebody, and if I didn't see it as a line item, maybe I missed it.
It was not added as a line item, but I can put it in as professional services. I'll research to see how much it is to hire a consultant for that evaluation.
That would be great. Thank you.
Any other questions from the board at this time? Okay. Board Member Dawkins.
I had a question about, I know negotiations are going on for the cost pool, and I think I was getting like a favorable, that we're anticipating a good outcome. But I wanted to find out, there was a meeting some months ago when the city of Richmond came to us and asked us for our help. When that occurs, do we have an assigned value for our helping the city? In other words, what I'm trying to find out, I'm trying to find something that the rent board, the rent program can use to offset cost pool charges. We have valuable resources within our program, and the city comes to us for help and assistance. If they can have their cost pool charges, why can't we have our valuable? Yes, General Counsel.
Yeah, thank you, Board Member Dawkins. So that's a good question. That's all subject to our ongoing negotiations. And so we are trying to assign value to our services as part of the negotiations to see what we can agree on as to what that value is.
Yeah, and the outcome, I hope, is that it's at least equal or we're a bit more. But anyway, I wanted to ask Executive Director, last time we were talking about hiring a person definitely for collections, finding properties not listed, a full-time person. It looks as if, I think the language used, we're going to ramp up our collection efforts. It looks to me like we've done a good job. And I'm wondering, do we still need this new employee?
Thank you, Board Member Dawkins. We do still need this new employee. In particular, they would be working through the list of the delinquent property owners to compel payment of the rental housing fee. Also to conduct exemption verification projects to research those properties that have previously been claimed exempt or inapplicable by the owners or determined by the rent board. So essentially, if you claimed your unit was rent-free or not available for rent or owner-occupied, we would send a mailing out to those properties to verify that they are still exempt or inapplicable. So that is a project that new staff person would conduct. They would also, a large part of their job is, or would be, to discover and investigate the newly discovered rental units that have skirted under the radar. In particular, there would be projects associated with identifying new owners that have just recently bought properties to make sure that they know they have to pay the fee. Also, investigating various apartment listing services, and we previously have attempted to conduct some of those activities, but we just didn't have the bandwidth staff-wise to devote, because it's labor-intensive to research all of these various properties that may be skirting under the radar. We would also assign that staff person to work with the city to identify and find unpermitted ADUs and unpermitted rental units, which there are quite a few that we discover regularly, usually as a result of the tenant coming in and saying they're having issues. But we believe that there can be expanded research around that, working with the Community Development Department to identify those types of properties. And also that new staff person would assist in clearing the significant backlog we have. But their main priority would be on collections, and just focusing on those properties that have been delinquent for several years, and that previous collection efforts have either been unsuccessful or partially successful. So I do believe we still need that staff person. Our current billing and enrollment staff are essentially maxed out in terms of what they can do, and because of the backlog and because of the need to proactively find new rental units and secure payment from delinquent units, we believe should be a position that's ongoing, it's permanent, and would presumably pay for itself over time.
At the last meeting, my positive attitude toward this new employee was because we were in a crisis mode because of the more than $250,000 projected deficit, which has been greatly reduced. I'm not fond of managing under crisis conditions. So I would say that was a very impressive list of things for this new person to do, but does it have to be a permanent, full-time, forever person? So for example, I think we could test out how useful this person is, perhaps with a one-year contract, rather than hiring a brand-new person, loading all of those costs onto our program. Rather than do that, why don't we just, let's just see how this person works out. Let's give it a year on a contract basis, and then maybe start them for first quarter. Certainly the third quarter, we could evaluate the value of their services. And if that impressive list you read off, they were very helpful with that, then we could decide in the fourth quarter if we wish to have a new permanent person. But I, right now, don't feel we need to hire a brand-new, full-time, forever person.
Okay, thank you for your feedback. I want to mention a couple of things. The first is that it will take several months to recruit the new staff person because we'll have to go through the whole process of recruiting this person, which could take 2 or 3 months, which is one of the reasons it makes sense to hire the person in the second quarter and not immediately. The other issue is that while I agree that it may be financially, just on paper, like an excellent idea to reevaluate at the end of the fiscal year, the work of that employee will be ramping up around the time that we would have to decide whether to keep them or not. That's just another consideration that, if we decide not to keep that person, now we have several projects that are now going to have to be allocated to the existing staff, which are, like as I mentioned, are already at their max in terms of their bandwidth and what they can handle. Then when you end up having a situation where you have a backlog, if you don't catch up, it just continues to burden that staff, and it makes it difficult to work on those more proactive projects that you need to engage in to increase the compliance rate. And so those are considerations. In the past, back in 2018, I think it was, we hired a temporary compliance staff person. They eventually became a permanent staff person. But in this particular situation, I think it would be more advisable to make them a permanent staff person. But ultimately, it's the judgment of the board to decide that.
And I appreciate your comments. I feel that had there not been that deficit that just astounded everyone, that we would have found a different way to handle our backlog, a different way to do things with current staff. So again, I don't feel I'm 100% convinced that we need a new person. But thank you for your comment.
Thank you.
Board Member Espinoza, would it be okay if I ask a quick follow-up question before turning to your questions? Okay, thank you. So I just want to confirm, my understanding of this proposed new position is that this is going to be a revenue-generating position. And so whatever we're spending in terms of wages, benefits, et cetera, to hire this person, we would be anticipating that we would be gaining that amount in additional revenue, or even more than that. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Okay, Board Member Espinoza.
Mi pregunta es, ¿se tiene idea de cuánto es el dinero que se debe al control de renta por los pagos atrasados?
Do you guys have an idea what is the total amount that the deficit is with the money that you haven't collected in the past, like the money that is not being collected? You know how much is the amount?
I'm going to have to come back to you with the exact number, but based on my conversations with the compliance staff, it is over 2,900, or is it 2,900? I can't remember the exact number, but it is well over $1 million in back fees that need to be collected. I stand corrected. It's less than $1 million? We'll come back with the exact amount.
Mi sugerencia sería que si se contrata a esta persona pongamos metas, porque si solamente estaríamos recolectando lo mínimo, no nos beneficiaría a nosotros. Tal vez que se logre que recolecte más del 95% para el próximo año.
Okay. I suggest that if we are going to hire this person, we need to be sure that that person is going to collect at least 95% of the money that is being missing. So if you want to cover that position, she suggests that that person can guarantee the job and collect the money that you guys are behind.
The position, if we add it to this year's budget, would cost approximately $89,000. Going forward, the full-time costs would be around $150,000. And I'm very certain that we would increase the collections to the rate that would pay that amount going forward.
Mi punto es que realmente le pongamos una meta, no solamente que lo esperemos, sino que pongamos una meta para esa persona.
So what I suggest is that we need to set up like a goal. Like this is the goal that that person have to achieve, not like waiting for what that person can achieve. Like this is what that person have to get at that point. Okay,
I understand. That can certainly be built into the assumptions. We can look at all of the fees that are due, look at the salary, and establish an assumption that they would need to collect at least their salary to pay for, to offset the increased salary cost.
I have a follow-up question to that, which is, so my understanding is that the costs associated with the new position have been baked into this budget. Have the increased revenues associated with the position also been baked into this new budget?
There is an assumption that that staff person focusing solely, or primarily, not solely, but primarily on collecting delinquent fees would pay for itself Of course, we can't predict the future, but based on the number of units that are delinquent, based on the work that staff has presented to me as to what would be necessary, we believe that it would pay for itself.
Yeah, thank you. I understand that. My question is, have those factors been included in the revenue projections for fiscal year '25?
I don't know. Fred?
As in, if we've included that compliance specialist in the budget already?
So I understand that the costs for the compliance specialist have been included. I'm asking if the existence of that role and the presumed success of that role was included in the revenue projections as well.
No. The revenue is based off of the total expenditures to operate the program. So we didn't increase the revenue per se with that new role being included in the budget.
So part of how the kind of study works, right, and I know that it needs to be based off real data, so maybe that's just the answer, is that we can't make projections off of this, but, right now, it's showing that the applicable unit count is increasing by 208 units for the year, and that's sort of where the fee is coming from, right? So the revenue is based on expenses, and then the fee is expenses given the total number of applicable units in each type of unit.
Correct.
This new person's role, as I'm understanding it, would be to identify additional units that are not currently tracked that would need to pay additional money. And so that would sort of change the denominators in the fee calculation. And so I'm wondering if it's possible to include some of the assumptions and projections about what this person will be able to accomplish in our budget projections for next year, given that we are anticipating having this person on staff for 3/4 of the year. I am uncertain why all of the applicable units and collection rates and all that is staying stagnant based on this year, or just based on what we know about already. Like, can we include any of that presumed information?
I could attempt to make a projection. I'd have to work with the executive director to see what his assumptions would be as to how the collections rate would increase.
I mean, there's two factors. One factor is newly discovered units. When we engaged in the last time we engaged in this project was during the pandemic, and over the course of 3 or 4 months, we found over 200 units. So there's that aspect to it. The other part is the existing units that are already counted here that are just not paying. And so those are two things that this staff person would work on. They would find new units, and they would go after the fees that are due for existing units. And if we added, and we could certainly, based on our previous project, figure out how many we were able to discover over a time period, and then come up with some assumptions. But they would be assumptions. We wouldn't be able to necessarily give you an exact number, but.
Yeah, I understand that all budgeting is guessing. That's what it is.
Right.
But yeah, just looking at it, looks like the proposed amount from collections for this year is 50,000 versus staying kind of steady at. Yeah, so it looks like the collections revenue for the projections for this fiscal year is 40,000, and the projected revenue from collections for fiscal year '25 is only 50,000. And so that's one place where it would make sense to me if we're hiring this additional person, that amount would be significantly higher. And then I also heard you say, or heard Mr. Tran say that because our collection rate this year is at about, yeah, okay, so this is the second thing. So that because our collection rate this year is at about 89%, that was the amount that was used as the assumption for next year. But if we have an additional staff person whose job it is to work on those collections, then presumably that rate would be higher. And so I'd like to see a higher rate included in that, or I'd like to see a proposed, an assumption of collection rate based on the conditions that you're putting forth in the budget of having an additional staff person there. And then the other thing I was referring to is on slide 13 and 14. In those 10-year financial projections, it's super tiny and hard to see, but if you go back,
Well, I can try to put the projection on the screen.
if you just had what you had there, it's fine. I just want to show what I'm referring to so people can know where I'm looking. Okay, so the third line under revenues is revenue from collections, which is different than the collection rate of the percentage of fee, right? This is sort of the revenue from prior years that was not collected and is now being collected.
Actually, that number is the amount collected by the collection agency that we have.
Got it. Okay, so then potentially that number wouldn't go up because this new staff person wouldn't be touching that. But that is something to consider if this new staff person is going about collections in a different way, how that might shift the collections agency's role in the future. But whatever, I just think that it's really important if you're proposing a major change like an additional staff person, that's not just taken into account at the expense level, but it's also taken into account at the revenue level and your revenue projections as well.
Sure, and I just want to also comment on the labor intensivity of collecting the fee for staff. So for example, if we discover a new rental unit, let's say we look we go to Zillow and find a unit that says it's rented and it's not in our database. The process of collecting that fee may take months because of the amount of back and forth communications, dealing with potential late fees that the owner wants to request a waiver for. It's a very labor-intensive process, which is part of the reason why our billing and registration unit has a backlog, because the amount of work I see employees like Ramona Howell or Moises Serrano or Julie Mendoza engage in, because my office is literally right outside of theirs, and I hear every day conversations that they have with owners trying to verify which year was it rented, was it Section 8, was it market rate, what was it? In other words, it's a very labor-intensive process. And when we did our pre-budget discussions with staff, part of what we were doing is trying to determine what staff's bandwidth is currently and what we would need to catch up and proactively begin collecting more fees. And that's why we determined that we would need a full staff person. We wouldn't need a part-time or temporary. We'd need a full staff person to bolster our billing and registration unit.
Yeah, thank you. To be clear, I'm not opposed to this new position. I just, in the interest of kind of trying to make everybody happy. I think that if we can take the existence of that position into account when we're thinking through what our collection rates will be, then we can potentially have the new position and all the things that we want to be included in the budget without significantly raising fees for those landlords who are paying their fees. And so I'd like to, and it doesn't, I'm not expecting any particular number to come out of it. I just would like to, some assurance that that has been incorporated into the projections and the budgeting process.
So to clarify, what you're suggesting or recommending is that when we come back with our proposed budget, included in that are some assumptions about what the impact that staff person would have on the collection rate. How many newly discovered units they might be able to discover, how many delinquent accounts they can go through in a particular month or year. Is that what you're suggesting?
I don't personally need to see that level of detail, but in terms of the kind of blanket projections, I would like to see that having been considered. In the same way that if you were having a position cut, you would adjust your projections accordingly because you would know realistically, we don't have the staff to accomplish what we accomplished this year, and so we need to measure our assumptions. Similarly, if we're adding a staff member, our assumptions should shift. We shouldn't just be using the same assumptions as this year.
Okay. I think I understand, but we can possibly discuss this, get clarification later, but I think I understand.
Okay, great, thank you. Vice Chair Guadalupe had to leave and wanted to let everyone know. So that was what happened there. Any other questions from board members right now? Board Member Dawkins.
I have a question about the rental housing fee to landlords. And I'm looking at the column that has fully covered rental units, and I see it going up and up and up and up. So my first question is this just a mathematical thing? You take a certain amount, and then you divide it by something else, and you come up with 261? Because I think at the last meeting, I heard 250 something. Now this seems to be more. And I'm not quite sure I understand. So is this just math, or are we taking into account other things? Are we taking into account the state of the economy? Are we taking into account monies? Well, I know we briefly discussed the reserve situation. In other words, doing something to reduce these fees, I guess is what I'm asking. What goes into the determination of 261 that would sort of be something more than a math equation? I mean, are we taking into account things that affect these individual landlords?
My understanding, and Fred, if you want to supplement what I have to say, I'd be happy to accept that, but my understanding is it's a math issue. It's pure math. It is, you look at the total number of units that you have and you divide it by the budget, and there are percentages assigned to fully covered units where they pay for the just cause eviction services, rent control services, and program administration. They pay all three components, and that together equals the rental housing fee amount. Partially covered units pay for the just cause eviction services and the administration services, so they pay a partial fee. But we don't build in any other assumptions. It's essentially the total unit count divided by the cost. So, and you mentioned also at you said at the last board meeting, we mentioned 250 something.
I thought it was 251, if I remember correctly.
I think it was 255, but that was for the base budget. So option 1 would have been 255, option 2, 261.
And this second option 2 has to do with the new position.
It includes the new position, yeah. The other option does not include the new position.
Yeah, I guess money and accounting and budgets is new for me. I'm trying to learn as fast as I can. But I've noticed in many of the things that we do, there are policy considerations, and they mostly seem on the tenant side. It seems I don't see any policy considerations. In other words, I don't think it has to be pure math. I think if our reserves are higher than we think they should be, and then there's something, some kind of end of year fund or something we can do to alleviate the burden on landlords.
So can I respond to that?
Yes.
So that's part of why I was pushing on staff to try to consider the additional revenue sources that we can have for this year, so that additional cost that comes for the new staff person isn't paid for by an addition to the fees, but is paid for by the additional collections that person is able to bring in. Exactly. And so that's why I think that, if we can make sure that we're incorporating all these assumptions into both the revenue and the expense side, that can help to mitigate that. And I also just want to note, we've been hearing directly from the landlords about their reading of the fees as going up and up and up. And I just want to note that the fiscal year 20 through 21, the fee for a fully covered rental unit was $219. And this year, fiscal year 23 through 24, the fee is $220. So it's gone up by $1 in 4 years, because it has been going up and then down and then up and then down. And so just the statement that like the fees are just going up and up and up is not actually borne out by the data. And the fact that the fees have stayed, it did go up by $8 for a fully covered unit between fiscal year 22 and fiscal year 23, and then it came down by $6 in fiscal year 24. And so I'm not saying that this isn't a big increase, but just that I think it's important to, when we're looking at this, to take into account that fees have stayed very stable during a period of extremely high inflation. And that we have not thus far been asking landlords to increase their payment. This is the first time that we would be asking for a significant increase, truly since like 2020. And so just want to make sure that we're like operating on the same data.
Yeah, I appreciate the level fees in the past, but that is the past. And so, yes, when I look at this, the reason for my question is that there's a considerable difference in my mind between 220 and 261. So I was wondering again, other than just math, we have policies to assist tenants. Are there any policies that we can have in mind to take some of the sting when these fees jump so high?
So one thing to...
Sorry, Board Member Height, are you trying to respond to that, or do you have a new question? Okay, great. Let's hear from Board Member Height and then Mr. Taylor.
If we get this compliance officer and we get more landlords into the system that aren't currently in the system, that's going to generate more revenue, and we can lower our fees again. In other words, the more money we bring in, if there's a larger base paying,
Yes.
that's going to lower the fees for the landlords. So I think a compliance officer would be beneficial to landlords would be beneficial to landlords, even more than it would be to tenants. I mean, tenants don't care. But if we bring in more money, we can lower the fees to the landlords.
I appreciate that point, and that does make sense. However, in the future, I think when there is such a huge jump like this, again, I'm going to be seeing if there are any also policy considerations that we can have as well as just a pure math equation.
So, thank you. Can I make a quick comment?
Yes.
Chair, thank you. A couple of things. If we increase our compliance rate closer to 100%, that will increase the likelihood of us going past the 25% reserve amount. Once you go past that, then you automatically have to reduce the fee as a result. So there's that factor. And the other factor is, of course, cost pool, which we are still negotiating. We can reach an agreement with the city where cost pool is significantly reduced or waived. That will also reduce the fee in future years. And you made also a comment about services for owners, and just to remind the board that at the last budget cycle, we approved $75,000 for legal services for landlords, and we're in the process right now of negotiating a contract with a provider. So we are working actively on increasing our services for our owners as well.
I appreciate that, Executive Director. Thank you.
Thank you.
Quick follow-up question to that. Am I wrong, or am I correct that there is a potential fee waiver that owners can apply for, or is that not correct?
There's no fee waiver. There is a late fee penalty waiver process.
Okay.
But there's no way we can waive the actual fee legally.
Okay. Is there any legal way to offer like a subsidy for the fee or slide the fee depending on the financial circumstances of the owner? Is that something that we could consider, or is that outside of the legal bounds? And I guess that might be a question for General Counsel Oceanuga.
Probably a question for, yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to look into that. I think you set your fees, and your fees have to be based on your expenses. And it's pretty clear that the ordinance says they have to pay whatever that amount is. So I doubt you can slide your fees in that way, but I'll look further into it just to be sure.
Okay, it would just be good to know whether that's an option or not, and then we can separately consider whether that's a good idea or not.
Yeah, and one thing that we have done in the past, and practice that we will likely continue, is allowing for payment over 3 months or so, 3 or 4 months. So basically, allowing for payment plans. We do offer that, and have in the past.
Great, thank you. All right, any other questions before we take public comment? Okay, where's my script? Okay, seeing no further questions, Madam Clerk, please call the public speakers.
Okay, Ms. Alana Clark, you have 4 minutes to address the board. Press the red button, I think.
Yes, the red button. Can you hear me with the red button? Okay. So, this budget calls for greater than 18% fee hikes for all the units. Any fee hikes for public service should be taken seriously, especially in the present economic climate. By the way, I really appreciate when people say owner or housing provider. Landlord is kind of a slur. Housing providers alone pay the fees. There is no pass-through to renters, as there is in most other rent-controlled jurisdictions, Berkeley, San Francisco, Oakland. That's something that you guys can change. It's not written in Measure L. It can be passed through if you guys decide that that would be a way to throw us a bone. And then the executive branch, I notice in this budget proposal, is getting a raise of 12.7%. So much for the 4 or 5% for the union members. This is in top of a 14.2% raise last year and a 13% raise the previous year. Last time I looked at the org chart for this body, the executive branch consists of 2 people, trailer and Tran. Now, the projected raises for the executive branch are 5% per year into the future. I don't understand why we can't start that pattern now. I'm all for them getting raises, but really more than well over 10% every year, year over year. That has a lot of implications for pensions in the future. And I don't know what kind of message it sends, but whatever great job they're doing, nobody gets that. Nobody, except them apparently. The reserve fund is at 25%. When the reserve fund was negotiated with this board, they decided on 18%. I don't know how it got to 25%. That is ridiculous, and it's not what the staff were directed to do by that board. I have heard you guys mention other options. I did not see other options presented. This is the first time I've ever seen just one option presented, one budget option. So maybe I'm mistaken on that score, but. So my request is that you do not rubber stamp this budget. Please draw down the reserve fund to 18%, as it should be, and reduce the raises for our executive branch to something reasonable, 5% or less. And get rid of eTrack-It. I have so many horror stories about eTrack-It. I don't know anybody who can successfully use it on the first try or the second try. I could share with you my own horror story. And by the way, it didn't work for me. I went in and paid with a check in person. eTrack-It is a very small bill. Unless you count all the fees you are not collecting, because eTrack-It is like the only other option. Come on, we live in the age of Venmo. You can figure this out. It's easy to pay bills. You have to make it easy. And you will get your money from a lot of people.
Your time has expired. Thank you.
If this is
Your time has
passed to the
expired,
city
Ms.
council,
Clark. I need you to stop
they
speaking.
will rubber stamp this.
turn her
Please do
microphone
not
off?
pass the buck. Thank you.
The next speaker is Andrea Miller. You have 4 minutes to address the board. Press the button.
Good evening, Chair Cantor, members of the board. Andrea Miller, Director of Finance for City of Richmond. I'm here to address the item before you for the budget, and specifically as it relates to the cost pool charges that has been mentioned a few times this evening. The city has just worked closely with the rent program staff and has collaborated since my return to the city a little over 8 months ago. We've met around 3 times to discuss the cost pool allocations in particular. We have, met the rent program's request to provide a revised study, the full costs, in which we agree that it's substantially higher, so we have agreed to leave those cost pool allocations as status quo. The City of Richmond does support the rent program through recruitment, hiring, processing payroll, invoices, as we mentioned this evening already, using our IT system. They're housed in City Hall properties. And as such, we do allocate cost pool allocations for those services to all city departments. The city has provided a $150,000 per year in the current fiscal year subsidy for those to offset those cost pool allocations. In next fiscal year's 2024-25 proposed budget to City Council, we have included a $290,390 subsidy, which is a 100% subsidy for the cost pool allocations. And we're willing to take back to our City Council at our upcoming council meeting to propose an additional subsidy for the current fiscal year. But it is important that we include the full cost of services in our budget to meet our generally accepted accounting principles. Cost pool charges, they include the workers' comp. Again, we hire employees, we recruit. They're part of our payroll system, so we have to include all the costs associated. It includes general liability insurance, administrative charges for the services provided through IT, finance, and human resources, as well as civic center allocation for the rent. And so we do, again, incorporate all those charges into our city's budget, and we do allocate a portion to all city departments based on a cost plan study. But with that, I just wanted to make sure we had an opportunity to speak to that and then work, again, closely in a collaborative process with the rent program staff to ensure that we've accounted for all of the costs appropriately. As it's stated as a footnote in the proposed budget before you this evening, that our staff has been working with the city finance staff and the city manager's office staff, and we have walked away with an understanding that the rent program will be charged for those associated costs, but we are providing a subsidy. Thank you.
The next speaker is Marilyn Langlois. You have 4 minutes to address the board.
Good evening, Marilyn Langlois, longtime Richmond resident. I was also a landlord here in Richmond for 6 years in the past. I use the term landlord with honor. I think it's an honorable business activity if it's done honorably, which the vast majority of our landlords do, I'm happy to say. We have wonderful landlords in the city, just a few that cause some problems. Anyway, in terms of the new position for the compliance and compliance officer, I just want you to remember that all of us who pay taxes to the federal government help pay the salary of a lot of compliance and collections officers in the IRS. And that's just the way it goes with government agencies. So it might be helpful for staff to look at what do comparable rent programs have in terms of FTE for compliance and collection of their fees, because certainly it is an important activity. And once you collect more fees and get through the backlog, I see the collection rate went up for a while and then went down a little bit, but there's still and it's been pretty good, but there is a backlog. So I think you need somebody to bring up that backlog. In fact, where it went down in 21-22, I'm suspecting that may have had something to do with the conditions that existed during the pandemic. And once all that gets caught up and new properties are identified, I'm pretty sure that by next year you'll see a reduction in the rental housing fee. And we'll definitely watch for that next year. But I think as of now, things are going well. When I look at the fees, the housing fee, starting the first year when they were separated, fully covered and partially covered, it went from $207 in 18-19 to now we're talking about $261, 24-25. That's overall a 26% increase over 6 years. So that represents an average of a 4.3% increase in this one fee each year, which I think really isn't bad. I think it's doing very well, especially if we're looking at most likely having a reduction next year with the new person on board to collect revenues. And I think you should watch to make sure that that person collects at least their salary and then some in revenues. And then finally, just for the cost pool, I appreciate someone from the city being here. I appreciate the collaborative discussions that are going on with rent program and the city staff. Of course, the city should not be subsidizing the rent program. I totally agree. However, as Board Member Dawkins and Staff Member Traylor have said, the rent program does offer valuable services to the city that are worth something. So what the city does for the rent program in terms of IT, finance, HR, that is worth something. But what the services the rent program provides to the city is also worth something. So I think these two should be able to zero each other out so that we can continue working really collaboratively, cooperatively, and in a win-win way with the city of Richmond. In any event, I want to thank the staff for this good work on the budget, and I hope you will move it forward. Thank you.
Thank you. That was the last speaker.
Great, thank you. Great, so at this point, we can open the floor for further discussion or any new questions, any thoughts? Board Member Height? Oh, got it. Sorry. Yeah, Board Member Dawkins.
I've been hearing some positive things. Glad to hear them. I'm just wondering concerning the fee for the landlords. If things become rosy, let's say 6 months from now, is there any kind of clause anywhere around that we can mid-year reduce the housing fee? Let's say things go really, really well, and we find that maybe March, January, we can reduce the fee by $20, $25. Is that allowed? Is there some mechanism for that?
Once the fee is set for a fiscal year, it's set for that whole fiscal year. However, as I mentioned, if we increase our collection closer to 100%, that increases the likelihood that we will go over the 25% reserve balance. Once we do that, anything collected above the 25% has to go towards lowering the fee. So it is possible for the next fiscal year that you would see a fee decrease. I know you didn't ask this question, but I'm going to mention also that based on what the finance director has said, they wouldn't be charging us any possible. Now that would this is going to change the calculus of the fee as well. I can't give you the exact number now, but we would come back to the board. I don't know if we'd have to come back for another meeting before doing the public hearing, but it would definitely reduce the fee by I can't tell you the fee amount, but the actual costable amount that we've currently budgeted in this proposed budget would no longer be there, which I think is around 80-something thousand. And
but I think we should get everything executed before we.
Yeah, we'd certainly have to get it all officially agreed upon before we can say for certain, but based on what we've been told, we would not be, the city is looking to cover 100% of the costable costs.
But again, I guess my question is there any way that we can institute something that would allow us to, mid-year, reduce the fees if it's clear that there would be no harm? So this thing of each fee is, is mandated to be for a year. Certainly that can change. I just don't know what the procedure is. So that's what I'm asking. Can we have such a procedure? Can we somehow make that happen?
General Counsel, did you want to say something?
I did not, but I can weigh in if you'd like me to. I think you can't mid-year change your fees because all landlords are going to have to pay the same fee. I mean, if a landlord, for instance, paid $260 whatever dollars are being proposed, and then halfway through the year, a different set of landlords are paying a lower fee or even a higher fee, I think that can lead to some problems legally and obviously administratively. So that's why we don't ever do mid-year changes. And well, I'll just leave it like that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I have two quick clarifying questions, and then we have 13 minutes before we're at our 3-hour mark and would need to vote on extending. So my hope is that we can finish this item within that time.
And Chair?
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but there are some questions that the board members have asked that I'd like to address, and because we have the city here, I just want to be mindful of their time. They're willing to come up and help address those questions, but you can go ahead and ask yours, but I want to make sure you know that that's coming down the pike.
Okay, great. So then we likely will have to take a vote at around 8:12 to extend, so just so everyone's prepared for that. And yeah, mine are really quick. Just clarifying some of the statements that were made, wanting to make sure that we're all on the same page. So the salaries that so first of all, can you clarify who is included in the executive staff?
It's the executive director, myself, the deputy director, general counsel, staff attorney, as well as the hearing examiner.
Okay, so it's 5 staff members?
Correct.
Not 2. Okay, thank you. Great, so there's 5 staff members included there. Thank you. My next question is the wages of the staff wages are determined by MOU contracts and not directly controlled by the board. Is that correct?
One more time, I'm sorry.
That just confirming that our staff wages are governed by the union MOUs and not directly controlled by the board?
Staff increases, yes. Well, kind of. So for executive staff, you evaluate the executive staff, but you have the discretion to determine what percentage they're going to receive up to a maximum of 5%. And then I believe for all of the staff, it's just based on a step, which is a automatic 4%?
Correct.
Okay.
But the like 12% increase that was referred to is due to the class and comp study and the union implementation of that new class and comp study, which was negotiated with the city and is not governed by this board.
Absolutely. The board had no discretion.
Perfect. Then my next question is, my recollection is that when we voted on our reserve level, it was always a range from 18 to 25%. We never voted on a single number as our reserve level.
That's correct. The past board passed the 18 to 25%.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Just wanted to clarify those pieces and would love to hear your addressing of board member questions.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Last meeting, we spoke about the deficit we were running. I can't remember the exact number, 240,000 approximately. We proposed a lower number, projected lower number today. And I had there was also a newspaper article published on that issue, and I heard a lot of questions, or I received a lot of questions from board members trying to understand why part of that, how we got into that deficit. And they wanted me to make a statement here, so I will. There was a cost pool charge, despite the fact that we had not, in this fiscal year, budgeted for cost pool. There was a cost pool charge that occurred on the city side to our account. I had some conversations with the city. They did send me an email today in response to my questions, but it was around 4:30. I didn't see it, but the city staff have been kind enough to attend this meeting, and they can explain how it works out. I don't want to mess up their explanation. From what I can understand, that charge is going to be zeroed out through a subsidy. I'm not sure if I'm being accurate, but I will, if you would like, Chair, you can invite one of the city members to further expound on that.
Great. If there is a member of city staff who would like to respond, we would love to hear whatever you have to share.
Hello again. So we would not zero it out, again, because we have to show full cost accounting, the full cost of the city expenses. We would offset that with a subsidy similar to as it is in the current year's budget on the city side. We have a $150,000 subsidy in the current year. We will increase that subsidy to offset the full amount of the cost pool charges, and we've done the same in next year's budget. For the cost pool charges are just over $290,000 in the fiscal year 2024-25 budget, and we have a 100% offset for those charges.
Great. So I believe that the reference to zeroing out would mean that the rent program would not be expending any funds to cover the cost pool, that it would be 100% covered by the city. Is that, and that's correct?
Correct. It would be a net zero. And again, I also want to stress that it would be pending city council approval.
Yes. Okay, great.
And just, I'm sorry, Chair, if I can ask one question, or just have you ask one
Yes.
question? I just want to clarify, that offset, zeroed out, however, whatever terminology, that's for fiscal year 23-24, and then there's a separate subsidy for fiscal year 24-25, and that's the first question. Second question is, what is a subsidy? Because in my legal mind, a subsidy means something that you were given or borrowed or loaned, and then you have to pay back on that money. It's not something that's, but I could be wrong, so.
Great. I'm assuming you heard those questions. Would you be able to answer them?
From the city standpoint, it's accounting, so it's an offset. So you're going to see the expenditure for the total amount, and we're going to have an offset, sort of a contra expense. So it's not going to be a loan, interest bearing, or anything of that sort. The subsidy is a transfer to the rent programs fund to offset the cost pool charges.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. All right. So any other questions, comments from Rent Board members? Okay. So then my understanding of what we're being asked to do here in the recommended action is to receive the draft budget and then determine at which meeting we will be voting on the final budget? Is that what determine adoption means?
Correct.
Correct.
Okay, great. And so I see that we have our schedule here, which shows the upcoming meetings, and that we have one scheduled for, a special meeting scheduled for June 11th and a regular meeting scheduled for June 19th.
Also one for May 31st.
And also a special meeting scheduled for May 31st.
Yes.
Does staff have a recommendation of which meeting, what a reasonable schedule would be?
Well, my first question to our general counsel is, do we need to, because the fee presumably will be adjusted likely downwards based on the cost pool being zeroed out, would we need to come back before the hearing to present the actual proposed rental housing fee amounts? Because if we do a public hearing, it's going to be based on, if we advertise for a public hearing, we're mentioning the actual fee amounts. And at this time, we don't have those fee amounts calculated, or we haven't even published those fee amounts for the public to give feedback to, which is required under the Brown Act. So I'm assuming, correct me if I'm wrong, that if we come back on the May 31st, that would be to come back with proposed option 2 minus the cost pool charges, and there would be a corresponding fee associated with that. Am I correct?
You have to, so the budget you publish is the one you are proposing, the final proposal that the board here is telling you. So for instance, if the board tells you, give me option B, but take away something or add something, and that's the board's direction, you can publish that Because again, it's not your, it's whatever is being published is just proposed budget. And just for clarity, the specific language is after reviewing, so the executive director gives you all a proposed budget, and then after reviewing that budget and making whatever revisions you deem advisable, the board shall determine the time for holding of a public hearing and shall publish that budget in the papers. So this is the process. If the board has no final, or if this is the final revisions that the board is going to be placing on the budget, then you can publish that revised budget. But it's up to the board. They might want to come back and see what your new numbers look like, your new fees look like before they put it out to the public officially.
Great, thank you. We have 3 minutes left, so I would like to make a motion that we receive this presentation and hold off on determining the timeline until our next special meeting, where we will have updated budget information, and that will give us ample time to publish 10 days in advance of whether we decide to do the June 11th or the June 19th meeting.
And Chair, you may want to include in your motion the changes that you all want to see. I think I heard
Okay.
include a 360 review.
Yeah.
And then you want some projections.
I can summarize those.
Okay.
Okay.
Real quick, do we want to check in with our board clerk in terms of our timeline? I'm a little concerned that if we come back on the 31st with the proposed rental housing fee associated with the proposed budget, that we may run up against the clock. Is that?
Well, we do have 10 days to post it in the paper, and our next special meeting is June 11th.
Okay, so it's
So
possible.
if we come back on the 31st.
Okay.
June 11th would be the next meeting.
Okay, all right, so it is possible, then,
Great.
thank you.
Okay, so I would like to make a motion that we receive the draft budget, and we direct staff to prepare a new budget draft with the inclusion of a 360 review process for the executive director, the updated information about cost pool based on what the city is proposing, and updated revenue projections based on the assumptions about this new staff person and what they will be able to do, and that we determine our schedule at the next meeting. Do I have a second?
I second the motion.
Okay, motion by Chair Cantor, second by Board Member Dawkins. Hopefully we can.
Okay, let's take a vote. Board Member Dawkins?
Yes.
Board Member Espinoza?
Yes.
Board Member Height?
Yes.
Chair Cantor?
Yes.
Motion passes to come back to the next special meeting, which is on May 31st, with a prepared new budget draft to include the 360 evaluation for our executive director, updated information for the cost pool charges, updated revenue projection that includes the information for the new amounts for a new staff person, and we could determine at the next meeting, I guess, the scheduling for the next meeting at the next meeting. I hope that's right. Passes with Vice Chair Guadalupe absent, and for the record, she left at 7:30 p.m.
Great, thank you.
We do have one more item, which is reports of officers, but I don't know how you want to do that.
Are there any reports of officers? Please say no.
No. No.
Okay, meeting adjourned at 8:13 p.m. We did it.
All right, meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Whew.